All right, welcome into another week of Whether or Not. I'm your host, meteorologist Scott Sumner. As many of us can attest to locally, it has been bone dry in parts of the region, with some cities and towns under a moderate drought from western Maryland down through the spine of the Blue Ridge Mountains, as you see behind me. But did you know, however, that a drought can be classified in three ways: meteorological, agricultural, and hydrological? Now, most folks think of a meteorological drought, which is defined as a lack of precipitation, but the other two classifications are just as impactful. The United States Geological Survey, USGS, defines a drought as a period of drier than normal conditions that results in water-related problems. And when we do not see the natural water cycle process take shape, as seen with this graphic, it is not unusual for a lack of water to represent a more severe drought of one type or another. For example, a very hot, dry summer may substantially lower crop production due to a shortage of soil moisture, but have little effect on groundwater storage replenished from the prior season. Now, in that example I just gave you, the area's drought is an agricultural one and not necessarily a hydrological one. As a recap, the information classifications of drought are lack of precipitation, meteorological, lack of soil moisture, agricultural, and reduced stream flow or groundwater levels, hydrological, with the impacts of a drought either being A, long-lasting, or B, short-term. So what are those impacts? During a short-term drought, initial declines in surface water can be detrimental to water supplies for agriculture and cities. But ultimately, over weeks instead of years, any surface water and groundwater eventually form one interconnected hydrologic system. This occurs when all surface water features, i.e. streams, lakes, reservoirs as seen here, wetlands, and estuaries, interact with the groundwater, and a major long-term drought is avoided. Now, examples of a long-term drought would be when excessive groundwater pumping brings about a permanent loss of groundwater storage in the aquifer system. But the most common example of long-term drought, however, would be when dry, hot, and windy weather combined with dry vegetation helps spark to these a wildfire or a multitude of fires. Now, the drier than normal conditions can increase the intensity and severity of wildfires, which can easily last months or years if not put out quickly enough. Similar to hurricanes Saffir-Simpson scale, which you see there, and tornadoes Fujitas rating scale, which you see here, droughts have a monitoring system as well. A 5-category system is used and is labeled as follows: abnormally dry, or a D0, which is a precursor to drought, but not a drought itself. Then you have a moderate drought, D1, you have a severe drought, D2, extreme, D3, and exceptional, D4. These drought categories show how much water is available in streams and lakes and soils compared to the usual for the same time of year. The U.S. Drought Monitor began in 2000 and is a collaboration between the National Drought Mitigation Center, seen here, the NDMC, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who share the weekly author role for the product. Now, currently, if you were to check out NOAA's NIDIS page, which is seen here, you can see that 30% of the U.S. is in a drought this week. 310 million crops are experiencing drought. 81.5 million people are affected by drought, as 38 states are experiencing a moderate drought, D1, or worse this week, too. As bad as that is, it pales in comparison to the worst drought seen and felt in the U.S. history. If you were able to go back in time and travel back to the 1930s, you would place yourself in what is known as the Dust Bowl era. Simply put, the Midwest soil dried into dust and blew away American farms. Times were so bad that at the end of the 1930s, more than 2.5 million people left the plains and migrated to California and other regions. Now, according to the National Drought Mitigation Center, the 1930s drought is considered to be the so-called U.S. drought of record, as it impacted, as you see with this graphic, the western third of Kansas, southeast Colorado, the Oklahoma Panhandle, the northern two-thirds of the Texas Panhandle, and northeast New Mexico. Though it is not possible to add up all the costs of the Dust Bowl era, it is currently estimated at today's price to run into the billions. And thankfully, though, by the 1940s, early 1940s, Nearly normal rainfall returned to that part of the country, and the recovery was slowly underway. While we are very dry now, and many folks I've spoken with have said that they hear the crunchiness of the grass at times, at least there is grass to be seen, even though it may be brown. Put it in context, the poor farmers and folks living in the central U.S. nearly a century ago didn't even have grass to walk on, as the ground was covered in dirt and dust. Here's to hoping that we never see a drought like that. As always, God bless, be well, stay safe, and we'll see you next week for another week of Weather or Not Podcast.